Evolvement podcast with your boy Nye, where cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, and our financial future are the hot topics.
That is the future.
Thank you for tuning in. And now, get ready. We are going live in 3, 2, 1.
Yo, welcome to the Crypto 101 Evolvement live at Consensus Collaboration. We are here with Juwan Lee and Mr. Michael Shill Nye. How you guys doing today?
Wonderful.
Day two.
Day two. What a beautiful day. It's been rainy, it's been cold and warm and very eventful inside this event. How have you been? You flew in from?
Well, I flew in from Hong Kong, so I traveled the longest to get here, so that's important, right?
Absolutely. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go through a couple of things you are doing in the space. You have a massive account for investing in the crypto space, blockchain technology, and all kinds of other amazing projects. We want to know all about that.
Hey, why don't you just start off by giving everybody a little introduction of yourself, Juwan? What are you working on? What's important to you? Why are you here in crypto, etc.?
Sure. It's so great to be here, first of all. My company is Nexchange Group, and we do three things in Nexchange Group. We have a media company, we have a digital investment bank, and we have a digital asset management. So basically, our media company brings all the flow, the deals, the community, and then we're able to market, invest, and give access to various different interesting products. Right now, the top of my mind, everybody, the Greater Bay Area. The Greater Bay Area is the largest innovation hub in the world. China is making sure that Hong Kong connects with Shenzhen, connects with Guangzhou, all through high-speed rail.
Yep.
And it will be 69 million people. Why is that important to me? Because I live in Hong Kong. I can go to Shenzhen in 15 minutes.
That's amazing. I lived in China for 13 years. I was there when Beijing had only 2 subway lines, built the high-speed rail, and built everything down to Shenzhen and Shanghai and everything. And that, my friend, is amazing. It moves so much capital, so much resources around at the speed that you need.
Yes. So you know that when you build a bridge between two, and you have water in between the bridge, you basically create transportation, you create connectivity. Well, high-speed rail will make all of this become an amazing innovation hub. But the more amazing is the concentration between Shenzhen and Hong Kong. There is a border, and that border at 2024 is going to be a visa-free zone. You can walk about, do whatever you want, and both Hong Kong and China is putting a tremendous amount of effort. And we are focused on a project on that. And what we're doing is providing the actual execution. What the government is talking about, we're doing it. And what we have is partners on the ground in China, allowing for onboarding, soft landing, investment, and also physical space, and the reciprocating thing in Hong Kong. So we are going to bring companies from outside the world through trusted hands to China. How about that? Is that something to be excited about?
That's
It's
something
very important.
Very exciting.
And I mean, I've known you for, I don't know, a year now, right?
Yes.
We've hung out in all different parts of the world. San Francisco, Hong Kong.
Where have we not hung out?
Exactly. And I mean, you're one of the, if not the biggest player in Hong Kong. So like what I really want to know from your perspective is what do you think and how do you think China is going to play a role with all of this blockchain crypto stuff? You know, we've seen the bans and all the fear that people have kind of instilled around China, but it's evolved recently. What's your opinion on all of that?
Well, first of all, let me just say that, the outlet for gambling in China was Macau. So the outlet for, crypto and blockchain became Hong Kong. So there is actually a great position that Hong Kong is that whatever ban that took place in China, well, the beneficiary was Hong Kong. Now, what we need to do is figure out how to play in that playground. There's definitely rules around this. And so I believe that China will have a very steady hand about what they do, but Hong Kong is now dealing with some of the, I would say, the unintended consequences. Some of it very positive.
Do you think that there's more projects being built within China that are going to be successful, or do you think it's going to be outside projects that come, learn to integrate with the culture, learn to integrate the technology into these structures over in China, and they're going to be successful? Like, do you see a lot of like really interesting things coming out of China?
Oh, absolutely. Just because a banned crypto doesn't mean anything about the actual development of blockchain. If you actually look on GitHub, you know, Shanghai, Beijing is top 4 or 5 in the world in terms of development.
Right.
So that doesn't change at all. China is pro blockchain. It's just not pro crypto.
My question is from like the Western perspective. I think that every time the mainstream media says something about China, it's a negative. They say it paint it in a negative form. Like Bitcoin is banned. Everybody in the West goes, oh no, Bitcoin's banned in China. It's a communist government or what have you. What misconceptions does the Western market have on what's going on in tech in China in general?
Oh, tech in general. Okay, so let's just say that.
And blockchain tech.
Okay, so I alluded to it earlier. There is tremendous amount of development that's taking place in blockchain. There are so many developers. There's projects that are being ignited in China, and even in the worst of times, and this is the biggest misconception, there were meetups every day during the ICO ban. Mm-hmm. And people were raising money everywhere.
Right.
So there is what China says you can't do, and each time they got more strict. But it was happening anyway because you can't stop innovation. Mm-hmm. It's like, you know, the prohibition. Just because you stopped the drinking or the selling of alcohol didn't mean alcohol wasn't drank.
Right. What are you personally looking at when you're looking at investing in the markets these days? Because you're experienced, you have vast knowledge of what's going on in tech, the innovations that are coming out, and from a financial point of view. When you see new projects, what are you gravitating to going, I know this before everybody else, this is going to be huge?
Well, that's a real big ask. So one of the things that I would say is this. I've been very fortunate to be involved in some pretty large innovative projects and companies. And I think the most important thing, when I sensed that there were several things in line when I heard the pitch. One is they were addressing a problem that was just so obvious that needed to be addressed, but it was being addressed in a way that nobody else thought of it before, right? So it's a very simple problem, but there's a creative solution to the problem. So one of the things I always look for is, like a social scientist, can a group of people actually adopt this type of product? I'm always looking from the other lens, not from an investor lens. An investor lens actually is biased. If you put a box around and create a process so rigid, you will never find the amazing projects.
Right.
You know, I will tell you, people always say it's about management, pedigree. Almost every large, gigantic company comes from people with no experience.
Right.
Yeah. So it's, I don't ever remember the Google founding team having tremendous amount of experience.
Right.
No, and Facebook did not.
Especially if you're an innovator, you can't have experience in something you're innovating on.
Yeah. So
right.
and the other thing is that it's never, history rhymes, but it doesn't repeat. So the thing is that you can't just say, oh, it's gonna be like this. No, it's completely different. There is no another Facebook. Okay, it's gonna be something that we can't even imagine. So. Yep. It's really about understanding real pain points, but the creative solutions around it, and big ideas just don't come in a box.
So when we were in Thailand for tokenomics, you said, and we were at dinner, and you and I were sitting right next to each other, and you said something to me that stuck with me for, I don't know, it's only been like 4 months, but anyways, it stuck with me for a while.
Wow.
And
that's amazing. And you hear a lot of stuff.
You specifically said that adoption is extremely hard to achieve, but once it is achieved, it's extremely hard to undo or erase or move away from.
Absolutely.
What do you think it's going to look like adoption-wise? Are you predicting adoption or whatever you want to call it? Does it look like a payment method? Does it look like gaming? Does it look like voting? What adoption centers are you inspired by for crypto?
Okay, well, let me first say it, not in the form that you're asking.
Okay.
Adoption happens with very little marketing.
Mm-hmm.
Adoption
Right.
is effortless. Adoption takes very little money to do.
Mm-hmm.
When it grows like that, that's very interesting. Later, when you get to a larger group, there's definitely more of those media metrics that you're trying to achieve, but adoption comes naturally.
And when you say that it comes naturally, you mean that people, like, for example, Facebook, they can just open up the page, put in their information, and you're seamlessly using it. They're not talking about it. There's no marketing. It's passed word by word, or how?
Yeah, word
how does
by
that work?
word, like, just by word, and then it just becomes so obvious that you're solving something. Why isn't there a solution for this?
Gotcha.
And it's nobody is paid to promote it, and it's effortless.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what adoption, when I see adoption happening organically, that's interesting. If you told me you spent $50 to acquire somebody, but you have 1 million users, wow, that's not adoption that I'm interested in, because, but I'm more interested in the organic, effortless, just almost no marketing adoption.
Right.
Because that's how all of these things happen
And that's
in
how
the
you-
chat room.
Yeah, and that's how you know it's needed, right? Like
Oh, yeah.
that's how you know, like,
Yeah.
the people who are using it really want it. It's not
Yes.
something they were forced upon or something.
What's the
like that.
difference between a need and a fad? Because some things come in, in one year, 2 years, and they go out, and because it wasn't needed, but it was cool.
Like Snapchat or something,
Oh, good one.
Yeah.
Wow, that's actually a very good comment. I would say, I'll give you an analogy. You need food.
I do.
You don't need sweets.
True. Okay.
They're both things you eat. So I would say that, it becomes like a staple, everyday part of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're solving that problem versus just something that's somewhat entertaining for the moment,
Right.
I think that's the way you can tell.
Can you tell us a little bit more? Actually, can you tell us a 101 on your company, Nexchange?
Nexchange is basically 3 companies in one. So we have created a media, we've created a digital investment bank, we have created an asset management arm. So the media really is about, we have large scale events. We run Hong Kong Blockchain Week. We used to run Hong Kong FinTech Week. And we have content, we have a social network, and all of those things drive like a funnel, just like a funnel for software adoption.
Mm-hmm.
And that funnel goes right into the 2 monetization points, which is, we have a asset management arm where we're venture building, we're investing, and we are actually investing in investors. We have a digital investment bank where we're raising capital and doing M&A. So all of these things are what I call monetization points. But what it does, it allows us to see is the full ecosystem, not just, one piece. You really understand what the investors are looking for, even what the investors of the digital funds are looking for, the whole ecosystem from A to Z.
And how do you separate the two, right? You were talking about earlier a little bit between being a leader and really focused about adoption, but you're also making investments or leading investors into projects, which has kind of a different mentality than just focused and aiding adoption. How do you separate the two, and how do you determine when it's important to be an investor and maybe get return on your capital, and being someone who focuses heavily on leading adoption?
Good question.
Yeah, so there are different stages. Generally, our company gets involved after adoption for investments.
Okay.
Because we're investing capital that's not our own. In terms of helping adoption, well, that's just our, blood, sweat, and tears. And our team working on, getting projects that we're passionate about. And they're not mutually exclusive. So we could have something that we're working on to help to get adoption that we eventually invest in.
Mm-hmm.
So we actually want to be the whole ecosystem as a service where we do all of it eventually. But it's the stage in which we do it. we don't generally get involved as an investment early on because, as we know, the numbers are against you. Yeah, but it doesn't mean we can't be highly enthusiastic so that we get to the investment point.
And at what degree do you enter in when you say quote unquote after adoption? Is this like kind of after the first wave, maybe once it's been validated? Is this after the second or third wave when there's X amount of users on board? Like, what to you signals adoption?
Adoption is really not an exact number for each product because every product has a different set of rules of adoption and addressable market. But we generally get in where we start to see, I would say, stage one in terms of that it was that organic level of adoption where we're starting to see month over month numbers that they're not just 1 or 2 months, but like 3, 4, 5 months that keep on doubling, tripling. These numbers that were seemingly not within the projections that we had. Then it becomes very interesting, I would say.
So it's more about growth rate than exact
it's about
numbers.
delta.
Right.
It's
Okay.
time and change. Because at some point, you got to pull the trigger faster than the other people when they realize what you got on. Yeah.
I think that a lot of
Interesting.
Western companies very easily overlook Asia in general, and especially China, especially Hong Kong, and they just kind of like market only to what they know. How would a company move into that market? Because honestly, after living there for so long, it's a tricky market. It's a hard market. It's very cultural based. It's very relationship based. What would you suggest for the Western companies to do if they want to look at Hong Kong or the Hong Kong Greater Southern China area better?
Well, let me just say that any company in a country that expands outside of that comfort zone into other continents is difficult.
Right.
So the same would happen for a Chinese company expanding to New York, right? I think, when you're, especially in blockchain where everything moves in hyperspeed and time is so essential in the execution,
Right.
you need to, when you expand into a market, first spend a lot of time finding the right partner that's going to accelerate and not, they've already made all the mistakes. They know the right connectivity to the right people, that you're not going to get ripped off or you're just not going to go down the right path. And there's so many rabbit holes you can go down when you're in another country.
True.
And you don't even know you're in a rabbit hole.
Right.
Whereas at least in your own market, you're in a rabbit hole, and you can determine how long you're going to be in that rabbit hole. Because when you're not speaking the same language, when maybe they say, oh, we're interested, but they're really not. There's all these cues that may be very different if you're not tapped into the right people.
Right.
So what we are doing is we ourselves work with local partners in China because we need to be even more exacting than
Right.
what Hong Kong people perceive what China is going to be. So that's important. You have to have the right contacts in place. And what we're doing is we're providing the bridge for international companies. And if they want to expand into China, we have that bridge.
How do they get over that fear? Because there's that Japan, China, Hong Kong, Singapore, India, the biggest economies in the world besides the United States, and if you want to call it the EU as a collective, are there. But there's such a fear barrier. How do they get over that fear?
Sure. So we have a couple stages. Hong Kong is a metropolitan city. It's one of the largest stock markets in the world.
Right.
So it is very much a place where a lot of people feel very comfortable. So in terms of the way we've kind of thought about it is you can soft land into Hong Kong or soft land into Shenzhen. So we have that kind of interim step.
Right.
So you're like in a city that speaks English, that you feel very comfortable with the culture, that practice European or UK law.
Right.
All those things which, is in your comfort zone. And then we can shimmy you over into Shenzhen. So it doesn't have to be a direct transition.
I mean, it's so unique, right? Because you have multiple different subsets just within China.
Yes.
And then
There's no one China.
exactly.
And there's no one strategy for China.
And there's no one Asia either.
Yes.
You go from Hong Kong to Shenzhen to Japan to Singapore to Thailand, and you're dealing with all of these different cultures, all of these different experiences, and all these different ways and languages that you have to communicate with people in order to get your message across or what you want to build.
Yes, and they don't always like even each other.
That's
So
true.
just remember that. And you got to be sensitive to all those historical cues.
Interesting. How do you advise companies to deal with something like this? Because, I mean, it wasn't until, for me, last year, about the same time zone area, that I really went and got integrated into the crypto culture in Asia and spent a lot of time. I mean, I spent 6-7 months last year just like meeting you and all these other people and learning how it works over there, and I'm still completely fucking clueless. So how do you advise companies that are trying to raise money, they're trying to gain adoption in these different companies? What do you advise them to do strategy-wise to be able to be open to the culture differences and the cultural languages that they have to use to communicate properly?
Well, I think you kind of put it into these like different tier markets, right? So tier 1 markets are more like the Hong Kong, Singapore, even Japan, and sometimes even Korea would be in that category. But they all have little nuances themselves. And, Singapore anchors the ASEAN, Southeast Asia market, Hong Kong, the greater China market. So you have to kind of have a beachhead where you come.
Mm-hmm.
It was so interesting. I try to tell people, because what was all last year? All last year was, people were raising money for ICOs.
Right.
And they would then, jump into Asia, and they would spend 3, 4, 5 months. They abandoned their family, and they said, basically, honey, I'm going to raise money. And then they moved to Asia.
Mm-hmm.
And they all had to create like a headquarter beachhead,
Mm-hmm.
even to raise money.
Yeah.
This isn't just adoption. This is just to raise money.
Right.
So some people chose Hong Kong, some people chose Singapore, and they would just fly all around the region just from that, right? Some people chose Korea.
Yeah.
So it's really about, what they discovered was that their product resonated with a certain group of people. And they kept on going back and forth. So there's no, substitute when you do a strategy, is that you put a strategy in place. And I would say the most important one is go out immediately and test which of these markets actually would resonate with your product.
Mm-hmm.
Then come back and re-strategize. Right?
How do you even test something like that? Like, how do you...
It's really about, each of these markets, you go there on the ground, and if it's an app or something, you can show them what you're doing or try to see other examples of products that are in the market. A lot of times you don't even know until you go there.
Right.
Yeah.
Then you sit around and you talk to the locals, and they say, oh, we already have a product like that.
Right.
So, or you just find out like, oh, they would never do that because the city's set up so differently. Let's say it's some type of traffic app or something like that. Oh, we have 10 of those. Maybe you had no idea there was 10 of those. But a lot of these things, it just hyper accelerates when you just go there and see it, versus being in the U.S., San Francisco, New York, trying to put yourself in the minds of somebody that's living in Indonesia.
Right.
You just can't do it.
One thing I really found about being in Asia, and I wonder if Nai saw the same thing, is that there is a very different style of just presenting your product. So if you're coming from the US, you build it a certain way, the websites look a certain way, the apps look a certain way, and then you go into China, you go into Japan, you go into Indonesia, and honestly, it's foreign to the Westerner. You're looking at it and they're like really blinged out. They use different colors. There's things popping, like in China especially. Everything's red, things are gold, things are moving all around, and Japan's wild. And Japan's wild too.
Oh my gosh!
It's like, so if you're a Westerner trying to build a product there, you're looking at these websites that people are making. They say, hey, you should make it like this, and you're just like, no, hell no.
Yeah.
How do you get over that?
Yeah, I will tell you. I can't tell you how many UI UX people I've met in the U.S. Oh, it's got to be clean, simple design.
Right. Yep.
All sorts of this Western style philosophies about how user experience should be. And then you go to and you look at some of these sites that have 50, 100 million users in China, and it is completely confusing. It's got so much words on it.
Right.
But they're massively successful.
Right.
So that's what I mean. There is no substitute for just going out there and looking what the local market is, then re-strategize. I think you have a strategy, but then you re-strategize, and you're constantly pivoting against the initial thesis, and always believing that you got to get to the right use case, not that you have the right one.
Right.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, thank you, brother, for coming on. You got any other questions, Matt?
No, I'm good. I just want everybody to make sure that they know how to find you if they want to look up your company or yourself.
Well, we are on nexchange.com.
That's nexchange.com.
Yes.
Juwan, if anybody sees Juwan at a conference, go up to him, give him a big hug, shake his hand. This guy's not only extremely intelligent and great at what he does, but he's one of the funnest guys in
And he
crypto,
doesn't
so-
mind unsolicited hugs, apparently.
Yeah.
Yes,
apparently
I
not.
am into unsolicited hugs. Just don't tackle me.
All right, thank you, brother, for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, bro.
This has been the Evolvement Podcast with your boy, Nye. Thanks for tuning in. Head over to evolvement.io for updates and join us next week for an all-new episode. Peace.